Once every year, as the 14th draws near, there's a hush.
Hi, my name is Christian Devine and welcome to Retro View, a safe zone for physical media. On this seasonal episode of Retro View, of course I'd like to ask you if you'd like to be my bloody Valentine.
You're invited to a party for lovers. But be careful. You may lose your heart. My Bloody Valentine, rated R.
Now playing at these area theaters.
My Bloody Valentine, our next film, is another mad slasher going after mostly women victims, this time in a coal mining town. I'm really getting sick of these pictures.
Now this is going to be the second retro view in which I've looked at or looked back on a film from 1981 in the horror slasher genre. And my previous retro view was for, as I stated in that one, maybe my favorite slasher films of the 80s, although it's technically, maybe you could argue it's not quite a slasher film, Just Before Dawn. And I highly advise you to go back and look at that retro view because I talk a little bit more about the year 1981, which was the peak of the slasher genre, because after Halloween in 1978 and Friday the 13th in 1980, the floodgates were open to every kind of holiday or seasonal event becoming a slasher horror film.
And this is my wish to all of you out there. It also happens to be the title of a new Paramount picture that I'm going to be holding a special screening for about in mid-February. And you still have time to receive your tickets by simply writing to me in care of Vile Valentine.
As I stated before in the Just Before Dawn retro review, I was not a huge fan per se of slasher films, although I had, at the time growing up, I had a strong interest in special makeup effects, and I loved Tom Savini and Rick Baker and the others, so I was interested in special effects makeup. And of course, you know, the star of a lot of these films were the special effects makeup. And so they were always fun to go see. I couldn't see everything as a kid in the theater, but I was pretty much allowed to see whatever I wanted to on TV. So that's where I got most of my slasher film education, and then occasionally in the theaters with a film that I'm actually going to do for the next retro review to celebrate Friday the 13th this year. And so, like I said, I like, you know, my attitude is always, you know, quality over quantity. So I like to think that the slasher films I liked were the best of the best. And it was a pretty controversial series of films, specifically because the film critics, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, on their show Sneak Previews, really went after slasher films on their infamous Women in Danger episode, where they really went to town.
And to sit there surrounded by people who are identifying not with the victim, but with the attacker, with the killer, who are cheering these killers on, is a very scary experience.
Yeah, the movies are played so that they really are in favor almost of the killer and really against the women cowering back.
And there's a fine line between, you know, exploitation and horror, etc. And so I would agree with some of their picks for films, but they kind of went overboard and failed to see just the kind of, you know, the fun drive-in horror vibe of these films. And, you know, Gene Siskel literally doxed Betsy Palmer from the Friday the 13th films, you know, wanting people to write her letters as to why she did the Friday the 13th film, which was just really, you know, aberrant to me. And they really didn't, you know, get a lot of genre films. And as much as people really love, you know, Roger Ebert, as I've said before, he trashed a lot of, you know, films that we consider classics today and films that I considered great then, like John Carpenter's The Thing, The Evil Dead. You know, these are all films that, you know, they trashed as Dogs of the Week or just didn't get.
We were both disgusted by My Bloody Valentine, the latest mad slasher movie named after a holiday. Another two no votes for that one.
And over the years, a lot of these films have kind of undergone a reevaluation. And books like Men, Women, and Chainsaws by Carol Clover, you know, kind of retextualizing a lot of these films has led to a whole different kind of, you know, genre attitude towards slasher films. And this film, My Bloody Valentine, has undergone a particularly relevant reevaluation because it was brutally slashed in the editing upon release. And a lot of this was due to Siskel and Ebert, because Paramount Pictures, who also, of course, distributed the Friday the 13th films, were very embarrassed by their slasher output. And, you know, they always kind of pretended like they didn't quite release them, even though they were huge money makers for them. And when the Motion Picture Association of America started coming down on these films, you know, My Bloody Valentine was certainly one of the most brutalized. Now, I first saw My Bloody Valentine in the same place that I saw many horror films. That would be on HBO late at night. And it was really a fun time. You know, usually these films would come on in the summertime, so it was great because I could just stay up all night long watching movies and reading books and doing my little special makeup effects and writing and drawing, etc. It was a really vibrant time for me, creatively. And of course, it was very scary for me to watch films like My Bloody Valentine at 2 a.m. on HBO. And I would invariably have to stay up all night long because I'd be so scared at the end of some of these films, like Just Before Dawn, which I also saw late night on HBO, that I would not be able to sleep at all. And without giving any spoilers away, the story is pretty simple but effective about a mining community that has a terrible mining accident followed by a gruesome murder. And the miner, Harry Warden, vows that if the town has another Valentine's Day event, he will return to kill. So you can see what's going to happen when they decide to have a Valentine's Day party. And I was immediately struck by its, you know, great Canadian atmosphere. And the mine is a, you know, perfectly cinematic and creepy place to have a horror slasher film. And the killer, of course, has a very, you know, great distinct look with his miner's outfit and the goggles and mask and pickaxe, and some creepy atmospheric music as well. I don't know that I bemoan the absence of a lot of gore. I thought it was relatively violent for those films back in the day, and I was certainly aware of how they were being censored because I was becoming a regular reader of Fangoria, which is kind of where they really kind of exposed a lot of this MPAA shenanigans that was going on behind the scenes, and they would also, of course, print photos of these censored scenes. But I just like My Bloody Valentine, like I said, for its atmosphere, some creepy flashbacks, some nice, you know, more in-depth character work than they usually have in a lot of the slasher films aimed at teens, and a very effective, chilling ending that I still remember being creeped out by and thinking, okay, I'm not going to bed tonight. Let's bust out a copy of the Stephen King book or try to find something fun on to clear my mind out. And you can't not talk about My Bloody Valentine without talking about the famous folk song, The Ballad of Harry Warden, from the film. And that's kind of lived on as another cultural accoutrement to the film's cult status. And like I said, I was aware that a lot of the footage had been cut out via Fangoria, and another Paramount film, Friday the 13th Part 2 and Part 3 in 3D, were also victims of the MPAA's scissors. And it was a really ridiculous time because there's no reason to heavily censor these scenes. A lot of things that they showed in other films were far worse, but it was the Reagan era, it was very censorious times, and these horror films had to kind of bear the brunt of this kind of social reactionary period. Now, as far as physical media releases go, My Bloody Valentine has had a long history on physical media, all the way back to Betamax. And I never felt the need necessarily to revisit it until around 2009 when they uncovered the deleted footage, the gore scenes done by the Academy Award nominated Tom Berman, makeup legend. And it probably wasn't until a few years after that that I saw the uncut version on DVD. And it was very sad because you could see that the film, when it plays out completely different with these, you know, wonderful gore scenes. And probably would have done better at the box office. I don't think it was a big hit based on what I read, and I'm sure that the loss of these scenes contributed to that. I know the director, George Mihalka, was very upset about how the film was cut, and so it's nice that years later he gets to be part of this, new movement of fans of the film, and that includes Quentin Tarantino, who says this is probably his favorite slasher film of the 80s. And I can totally see why, like I said. And even more exciting in this amazing day and age of physical media, that we have an actual 4K release of My Bloody Valentine, a 3-disc set, 4K restoration in Dolby Vision with all of the uncut gore, and you have a Blu-ray with the 4K restoration, and then a third Blu-ray disc, and with tons of bonus features. And you also have the original cut if you want to watch that, just comparative. There's no reason to watch the original cut unless you just are squeamish about the gore. And so this is really an amazing disc. And as you can see, it's got a slipcover, which I know is very important to people, not to me at all. And just a great poster, really great poster design. And rewatching this on the 4K, it was really a treat because it looks absolutely fantastic. It looks so good. It's just in terms of the film, I'm not saying this is Lawrence of Arabia or 2001: A Space Odyssey, etc., but this is a really fantastic mastering and restoration of this film. And the best thing is that because they took it from the camera negatives, the deleted footage, which looked a little grainy and shaky before in other releases, blends perfectly with this release. So it's hard to tell for the most part where one cut ends and another cut begins. So you couldn't ask for more. There's a couple of gore scenes that I guess they were not able to find, which is too bad. But they have everything here in all its Tom Berman glory. And there's an interview with Tom Berman, and he talks about how much fun it was to work on the film, although it was very lo-fi from his Hollywood point of view. And Shout Studio, the Scream Factory, did just a fantastic job with this release, and I'm assuming it must be pretty popular because they keep coming out with versions of My Bloody Valentine. And you could not get a better release. Until they find that footage, this is going to be the definitive release of this film. And I highly recommend it for fans of 80s horror and slasher films, and I think this is a cut, no pun intended, above the usual teen slasher fare. And I like all the actors. Very Canadian. You'll notice those accents. It has the vibe of a Canadian tax shelter movie. I'm not sure if that applied per se to this. But the actors are great, and they have some really, the reactions are really like, they make me laugh because they're so genuinely like disturbed people when they see the hearts in the box and the bodies in the washing machines. Their reactions are viscerally disgusted. And like I said, Paul Zaz's music is creepy and effective. So highly recommend this one, and especially for this Valentine's Day week. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the 2009 remake from Lionsgate, My Bloody Valentine 3D, which I have never seen, and I'm going to rectify that, especially in light of the next Retro Review coming out, because I love 3D movies, and the fact that this cost $14 million is kind of amazing when you consider how lo-fi the original must have cost. But this comes very well reviewed, and to me, my criterion for a 3D movie is simply to throw shit at my face, and if it's a horror film, so much the better. And thank you so much for retroviewing once again. Please like and subscribe because that makes a huge difference. And if you do, I promise that I will be your Bloody Valentine.